this generation of athletes wants to train in ways that are effective. And a lot of training methods are effective, but not as effective. And they want to train in the most effective possible way. What is the purpose of this drill? And so if they can know that, right, and they can understand what translates actually into a real game, what's actually going to help them get real results, they're going to do it and they're going to execute it. Now, of course, they're kids. They're not going to always be perfect. There are going to be times when yes, they are lazy, or yes, they are being quote unquote a little bit soft, right? And that's where coaching comes from. But we were too when we were kids, right? If I look back, I used to mess around in drills, right? Especially if it was an unengaging drill, right? You are listening to the Bridging Impact Podcast, transforming leaders on and off the court with host Coach Furtado. Without further ado, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast. And in today's episode, many of you know that it is a solo episode with me, Coach Furtado, talking today. And what I'm going to talk about, actually, instead of giving certain pieces of wisdom and advice that I've learned from other coaches and from experience, I'm going to share my thoughts, my opinions on what it is really like to coach this generation, because I feel like this generation is incredibly misconstrued. And I'm going to be honest, I love coaching this generation. Of course, I'm a young coach, so the only other generation that I haven't coached or that I could have had an opportunity to coach is my own generation, right? So I consider myself, even though I'm technically in this generation with them, I tend to think of myself as one generation above. So I want to give a little bit of context on where my opinion is coming from. So I mostly coach high school age athletes. I do have some younger athletes. I actually am doing a camp this week specifically for a school, and it's a third and fourth grade camp in the morning, and in the afternoon it's kindergarten and first grade. And whew, that can be tough. That can be tough, let me tell you. However, so most of my thoughts and opinions are going to be kind of geared towards the high school age range, and I'm in West Los Angeles, so obviously wherever you are listening in the country, if you're listening in America or if you're listening abroad, whether you're in Europe, South America, Australia, Asia, that's going to kind of depend. Obviously, there's a lot of cultural and environmental influences that impact kids and how they are raised. And so I wanted to give that kind of context before we started, and I really wanted to do this podcast because I'm going to start with a story of an athlete. So last Monday we have basketball training, and so it's been weekly on Mondays, and I have this one athlete who's been working with me for over a year now, so about probably a year and 3 months, and their growth has been tremendous. But it's because their tremendous growth is, of course, I'll take some credit, right? But I feel like those that make the greatest strides, it's because they really want it. And I see this generation, a lot of the athletes I work with, are incredibly driven and really want it, and they want it bad. At least the ones that I am working with. And I think this generation is labeled as soft, is labeled as lazy. And I'm going to kind of break that myth in a little bit, at least from my own perspective. But this athlete played a 3-day tournament in Las Vegas, 4 hours away, maybe 5 hours away, depending on traffic, and decided he drove home on Monday and he came to the 2-hour training. He texted me, Coach, I'm going to be a couple minutes late. That it was at like 6:08, and he was in there competing the entire time. No complaints, no anything. That's how bad this athlete wants it. And if I'm going to be honest, he is probably, if the other athletes are going to look up to someone, he is someone who's incredibly driven, who is research backed, who takes full advantage of the internet and doing his research. And so yes, he is a special athlete in the way that he approaches his life. But I also have a lot of other athletes that are very similar. I have multiple athletes who, one went to another country for 3 weeks and was like itching to come back and was doing as much as he could to work out and stay in basketball shape. Like, these kids love basketball, and I really, like, just like we did, our generation and the generation before, we all loved basketball, right? And now, the myth of them being lazy, of them being soft, I'm going to break that right now, because in my perspective, right, if you build, this generation needs a couple of different things, right? They are not just going to let you bark at them if you don't have a relationship with them. Now, if you want to give them direct feedback, right, because you care about them, they'll listen. And you can be as hard as you want on them. If they know you care about them, right? I've laid into some kids when I coach, right? I coach them intensely, right? The kids I coach the hardest are the kids I have the best relationships with. They want to be coached hard. They want to get better, but they want the people that are pushing them and coaching them to give a shit about them. That is what the difference is. Number two, on like sort of the, again, kind of the soft thing or the lazy thing, this generation of athletes wants to train in ways that are effective. And a lot of training methods are effective, but not as effective. And they want to train in the most effective possible way. What is the purpose of this drill? And so if they can know that, right, and they can understand what translates actually into a real game, what's actually going to help them get real results, they're going to do it and they're going to execute it. Now, of course, they're kids. They're not going to always be perfect. There are going to be times when yes, they are lazy, or yes, they are being quote unquote a little bit soft, right? And that's where coaching comes from. But we were too when we were kids, right? If I look back, I used to mess around in drills, right? Especially if it was an unengaging drill, right? It's like sometimes we have this, these thoughts around, when we were doing this, we did this, this, and this, and we did it perfectly. Like, you would go back. There was no way you did it perfectly. Now, I think that maybe the generation before me, so I'm a generation, I'll consider myself a very young millennial, or a very old Gen Z, whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. Now, maybe, the Gen X and the boomers, right? They were coached in different ways, and that's probably, a little bit removed. However, we evolve, right? If you want to be, you can still coach kids as hard as you did back then. You just got to care about them first. You can't be an a-hole, right? You can't, right? The word is going to go around. It's going to travel fast, and there's so many options. I don't know about where you are listening from. There's so many options in Los Angeles. If you're an a-hole, if you're a bad coach, if you don't care about kids, they're going to take their money and their time somewhere else. They're going to take their development somewhere else. So again, it may be more challenging in a smaller community, like where I was from. I was very fortunate to have great coaches, right? But then you have less options for coaches. But the youth basketball world has exploded. The youth sports world has exploded. It's a bigger industry than the NFL. The youth sports industry is a bigger industry than the NFL. There's got to be choices in most places where you are listening. Again, I would love to hear what y'all's thoughts are on this generation, because I feel like if you are an effective coach, which is why you should be listening to the podcast, right, on different effective coaching methods, on how you can be engaging, on how you can care more and build better relationships, and how you can actually give criticism that they will receive. I'm not saying I'm a perfect coach. I have a lot of things I'm still working on, right? But I just wanted to put this out there as a public service announcement that this generation is just as ambitious, is just as driven, is just as tough as the last generation. And if you don't think so, then either number one, you're not challenging them enough, or you don't have a good enough relationship with them, and you need to figure out which one of the two it is. So those are my thoughts for today's podcast. Appreciate you all listening. I will have a mental skills coach on for you all next week. I'm excited to have another guest on because I get an opportunity to learn and become a better coach myself. So, Coach Furtado, thank you for listening to this episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast. We'd love it if you would like, subscribe, leave a comment and a review on whatever platform you're on. It's the best way to help us grow. We appreciate you for doing that. We'll shout you out on social media. I'd also love if you connected with me on social media. Let me know your thoughts. And this is why I do it. I want to share knowledge and wisdom from experienced leaders to people like yourself and myself so we can have this dialogue and move forward, make an impact on the world. So stay tuned, stay subscribed. Cheers.